Every project always seems to start with some demo work. Fortunately, the removal of 15 feet of baseboard was all that was standing in our way of creating our dream library. The build time for this project needed to be quick, given I only had a week off of work and I didn't want to have my house and office a construction zone. Therefore, we decided to purchase prefab cabinets from Home Depot. We could have built them ourselves, but time was of the essence. The first step was to build a platform for the two 54 by 12-inch cabinets to sit on. The platform needed to be 2 inches wider than the cabinets to provide ample space for the shelving units to sit on and provide enough countertop space. Our first step was to cut 8 2x4s at 11 inches wide, and there's no better place to do this than in our shop. When you're making multiple cuts of the same length, it's really helpful to set up a stop. Now don't forget to put your hair up when working with power tools. So while I was in the shop making cuts, my dad was dreaming up our next project. You really can't leave this guy alone.
Well, I am the project dream.
All the 2x4s were fastened using 2.5-inch long screws, and while I was putting those in, my dad was outside cutting the plywood for the top of our base. Quick tip: I learned from the previous library build that it was important to mark the studs all the way up the wall, which will make fastening these cabinets and shelves much easier.
Before we could move on to the next step of installing these cabinets, I moved the outlet up the wall for future access. After that was complete, we shimmed the base because this floor was not level. Next, we install a 2x4 wall that serves two purposes. One, it pushes the cabinet away from the wall by 1.5 inches. And two, it is an extra support for the butcher block top. Before we attached the cabinets to the wall, we needed to join the two cabinets together. I clamped the face of the cabinets and countersunk 2 holes to secure them without a seam.
Now I was able to secure the 9-foot long cabinet to the wall. And with that, we are now able to start building our way up, starting with the butcher block top, which we purchased from Lowe's.
Now the butcher block was 60 inches long by 30 inches wide. The first step was to cut a piece 15 inches wide. As you can see, it's a perfect fit. The second piece needed to not only be ripped to 15 inches wide, it also needed to be cut to a length of 37 inches. It fits perfectly, but it's not yet fastened.
Before we secured the top and the shelves, another thing I learned from our last library build was to be sure I painted the wall and the ceiling. Believe me when I say this is a huge time saver, given you don't have to paint in tight spaces or worry about taping anything off. So when we did the last bookshelf a year ago, we waited until the very end to paint the ceiling, and it was kind of a pain because I had to kind of crawl up on a ladder and get underneath the trim work to paint the ceiling. So right now, I'm gonna measure 10 inches out from the wall, make sure I don't go beyond that, and I'm gonna paint the ceiling and get it done before we put the shelves up.
Well, it's time to start building the shelving units, and the good part is, all 3 shelves are identical in height and in width. What this means is all our cuts can be repeated, which is a huge time saver. We set up our stop at the miter saw and began cutting our shelves 34.5 inches long, and then ripped them to 10 inches wide.
The first step in the assembly process is laying out where the shelves are going to be. Now, before anyone makes any comments, my basement is quite cold in the winter, which is why I'm dressed like an Eskimo. And by the way, go Celtics! I want to give a special shout out to my Craig jig here. It handled 72 pocket holes for each of these shelves with ease. With everything all drilled, we started gluing our shelves, lining them up with our drawn out template, and screwing them in place. Let's see how it all fits.
Hey, you're probably wondering why I'm cutting this piece of lumber in the middle of my daughter's kitchen, but she just painted the wall and we don't want to get sawdust all over it. So this is a notch I'm cutting in order to support the cabinet and actually hold it to the wall.
As I mentioned earlier, painting as much of this project as you can ahead of time will only make the building process that much easier. Because we were doubling up on our shelves, we waited until everything was painted before gluing them in place. This is because these particular shelves were being urethaned and we wanted to avoid painting around them. When we glued the second shelf in place, we made sure to clamp them all down. So right now we are taking all the clamps off of these shelves so we can put the shelves up onto the wall and secure it to the wall. It's trim time. This is when the project really starts to look complete. My dad and I are fastening a 1x3 to the top of the cabinet that will be the backer for our crown molding. And then we installed the vertical pieces. Anything that has been primed will then be painted. The trim for the front of the shelves is maple, and that will also be urethaned. Although we didn't show it, everything was sanded, so now I'm giving it a quick wipe down with a tack cloth and vacuuming each shelf prior to urethaning.
After all the trim was complete, we then worked on cutting and installing the baseboard. The 1x6 needed to be ripped to 5 inches and cut to a length with a 45-degree miter joint.
Now don't be intimidated by crown molding. Cutting can seem a little bit complicated, but once you have an understanding of the process, it can be pretty straightforward. So normally we would scarf joint these two pieces together. That's exactly what we did on the other side of the bookshelf, and it came out really nice, but it was also a pain. And we get the same look by just butting it up against the piece right here. So we put some backer boards right here, these back pieces, so we could easily screw them in place. And if you just put them up next to each other,
You just screw them in place.
whatever, nail them in place, screw them in place. But if you just do this, butt it up against you like this, now we can nail them into the pieces that we put in the back. And you can kind of see the seam right here, but it looks pretty good. It actually looks the exact same that it does on the other bookshelf. So you get the same thing. And you know what? Don't even worry about the space at the top right here, because we're gonna caulk that all in and it's gonna be painted. So you're not even gonna see any sort of gaps. So let's nail this in place. How's this look? How do we look? We look good? Can we nail it in?
Wrong nail.
No, it's not. You wanted to pin them.
Is that your pin nailer?
Yeah.
Well, I get it.
It's my pin nailer.
Okay.
Thank you. It's my pin nailer.
Painting and urethaning this project was coming to an end. The final step was spray painting our cabinet doors. Yes, spray painting. We used our Greco spray gun with Sherwin-Williams iron ore paint from the emerald green line, which provided a professional result. This spray gun allows you to shoot paint without diluting, which is key. We sprayed the back of the cabinets in the basement, and then we were blessed with a sunny day in which we could spray the front of our cabinets outside. Once the doors were dry, we began the installation.
Now let's add some poles for these doors. Quick tip. Before painting your doors, mark them with the number door that they are, and you can mark them right where the door hinge goes. So then when you paint them and you cover it with tape, you'll be able to tell which door goes where. Okay, so I lied. The hardware was not the last part of this project. What really was the last part of this project was putting back these really crappy baseboards. Now these baseboards that we kind of acquired when we moved in have been banged up, painted on. They're terrible. Eventually I'd like to replace them all, but that's a larger project and I'll get to it when I get to it. But for right now, we're just gonna put these back up. Thanks for watching our home office library build. If you'd like to follow along on future projects, feel free to hit the subscribe button below.